Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. Have you ever stopped to wonder about, well, one of the greatest psychological mysteries living right inside your own head? Today, we're exploring something absolutely fascinating. It's called the internal architect. And more specifically, we're going to look at the deeply ingrained paradox of self-compassion. To really wrap our heads around this, we've got to start by asking ourselves a kind of uncomfortable question. Are we the biggest hypocrites? I mean, seriously, think about it for a second. Our entire lives, we're taught how absolutely crucial it is to be kind to others, right? We're praised for our empathy. But when it comes to the person staring back at us in the mirror, oh man, it's a completely different story. And this beautifully illustrates the glaring double standard we all seem to develop by the time we hit adulthood. You know the drill. When a friend makes a mistake, what do? We're quick to forgive them, we defend them, we totally give them the benefit of the doubt. But how do we treat our own mistakes? Usually with harsh criticism and, let's be honest, self-loathing. It's like we're incredibly compassionate to the entire world, but absolutely merciless to ourselves. So let's look at the data of self-doubt, because this isn't just some vague, universal feeling. There is actual concrete proof of this paradox. The numbers reveal a pattern that's honestly impossible to ignore. A staggering 86% of young adults, specifically the 18 to 34 demographic, report being dissatisfied with their bodies. Now, women do report the highest levels here, but men, they're actually right behind them. That leaves a tiny, tiny 14% of people who feel satisfied or even just neutral about themselves. Just 14%. And this deeply rooted self-doubt, it bleeds into so much more than just how we look. Informal studies suggest our inner critic completely attacks our capabilities too. Over 50% of us actually believe we haven't achieved enough in our lives. Half of us. And even wilder, 25% of people literally believe they lack basic intelligence. Think about that. 1 in 4 of us is walking around fundamentally doubting our own minds. Now, what's really interesting about this is a bizarre and honestly kind of ironic study from 2013 that highlights this perfectly. Researchers had participants rate the attractiveness of different voice recordings. But here's the catch. Unbeknownst to them, their very own voice was in the mix. When participants heard their voice but didn't know it was theirs, they rated it significantly higher than the others. But the exact moment they realized it was their own voice, boom, immediate self-rejection. It turns out we actually like ourselves, right up until we realize it's us. This captures the total absurdity of this psychological glitch so well. Hatred only appears when we know it's ours. We reject ourselves by default simply because of the self-label. I mean, it really highlights how automatic this response is. Just slapping the label of self onto literally anything is enough to trigger this reflexive, negative rejection. So where on earth does this reflex come from? Well, let's uncover the biological roots and see exactly how we are wired for negativity. The foundation for why our brains process positive and negative experiences so incredibly differently is tied to a concept you might have heard of, the hedonic treadmill. Basically, this is the human tendency to quickly return to a relatively stable baseline level of happiness, regardless of whether a major positive or negative life event just happened. But here's the thing. The way we adapt, it is not symmetrical at all. So the crucial point is found when researchers compared 2 completely different groups adapting to massive life-changing events. Take extreme positive events. Lottery winners showed super rapid adaptation. The emotional high faded really quickly, and they just bounced right back to their baseline. But extreme negative events? Accident victims who became paralyzed showed a much, much slower adaptation. The emotional impact lingered longer, and it cut so much deeper. Simply put, bad experiences shape us far more profoundly than good ones do. And there's actually a very practical reason for this. For our early human ancestors, prioritizing the negative was a literal evolutionary survival mechanism. Think about it. Ignoring a positive opportunity, like say walking past a delicious fruit tree, might have resulted in a little hunger or regret, but ignoring a threat, like a sudden rustling in the bushes, that resulted in death. Evolution basically demanded that our brains hold on to negative information just to keep us alive. And you know, that ancient survival mechanism translates directly to our social lives today. Human survival absolutely required group acceptance. We evolved to survive in tribes, right? So being accepted wasn't just some nice social perk, it was a literal matter of life or death. To be rejected by the tribe meant risking total isolation and ultimately your demise. That ancient fear of predators is exactly the same as our modern primal fear of rejection. Now, if biology set the stage, modern society definitely turns up the volume. Let's shift gears to culture and self-discrepancy and see how our environment acts as a massive modern amplifier. In highly individualistic societies, we are constantly fed this concept called conditional positive regard. It's this pervasive cultural idea that love, warmth, and support aren't just inherent rights. No, instead, they have to be continuously earned through intense effort, constant achievement, and sheer willpower. So, when we inevitably fall short of these constantly shifting cultural standards, we don't just see it as a minor mistake. Oh no, we see it as proof that something is fundamentally broken within us. Let's move to self-discrepancy theory and see how this builds up. This is a genuinely fascinating psychological framework that explains the deep emotional distress we feel when our actual self doesn't match up with our ideal self, or what they call our ought self. It perfectly maps out how fractured our identities can become. According to this theory, you don't just have one single version of yourself living up there in your head. You actually have three. First, there's who you actually are right now, your actual self. Second, there's who you desperately want to be, your ideal self. And third, there's who you think everyone else expects you to be, your ought self. And right here is the absolute core of the problem. When these three versions completely fail to align, the result is this chronic, low-level sense of shame and anxiety. The constant grinding friction between these misaligned versions, that's the root cause of our endless internal distress. But listen, there is a way out. Let's take a breath, slow down for a second, and talk about breaking the criticism cycle by shifting our perspective. How do we actually fix this? Well, the answer is highly actionable, but it really requires a distinct mindset shift. Step 1. You've got to recognize that biological and cultural biases are actively working against you. It's honestly not entirely your fault you feel this way. Step 2. Shift your perspective to see yourself as a stranger. And step 3, treat yourself with the exact same natural forgiveness and understanding that you so effortlessly offer to everyone else. When you finally manage to make that shift, an incredible sense of relief follows. You start to realize that the intense pressure you've been putting on yourself, all those completely impossible standards you've been clinging to, they were never realistic to begin with. They were literally just culturally fabricated illusions, heavily amplified by your own biology. Which brings us to this incredibly powerful realization from our source material. The walls of constant criticism don't need to be torn down. They simply stop making sense. The solution to this entire paradox isn't to fight some brutal, endless war against your own internal critic. It's simply a change in perspective. Once you finally look at yourself through the gentle lens of a friend, all that harshness, it just completely loses its logical foundation. So I want to leave you with this to really ponder. What happens when those walls of criticism finally stop making sense to you? When all that biological static and cultural noise just fades away, are you ready to meet yourself as a friend? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer today, and I really hope this gives you a completely new way to look at the person in the mirror.